What's up, Gear Mortals? Trey Xavier here. Today I'm going to show you how to use ambience on the guitar. Ambient effects, or time-based effects, are the best way to make your guitar playing sound way bigger and overall just more spacious and better in a lot of ways. The ones that we're going to talk about today are delay and reverb, which are kind of like different versions of the same idea. It's when you play something and then you hear it again in some form. In order to demonstrate these different delay and reverb effects, we are going to use the brand new Mark Holcomb signature Dark Sun from Seymour Duncan. And the reason for that is because it has both a delay and a reverb, plus a ton of routing options where we can route the delay into the reverb, or the reverb into the delay, or we can send them each out individual different outputs so that we can process them separately. So what exactly is delay and reverb? Why do we use them separately or together in series and parallel and all this different stuff? Well, delay is a more specific effect in the sense that you can control the exact number of times that you hear the repeat of what you're playing again. And you can control it to repeat in certain rhythmic patterns a certain number of times, in stereo, back and forth, like a ping pong delay. And like I said, delay and reverb are both just the idea of hearing what you play again in a certain way. Reverb, on the other hand, is more like the sound of a space, of a location, of your sound bouncing off multiple different surfaces and coming back at you in a much more washy way. And this gives you sort of a nice halo around your sound. It gives it a nice ambient feel. Basically, it gives your sound some depth and keeps it from being this sort of dry, just immediate sound. So what we're doing here is we're using the delay to give a specific rhythmic effect, and then adding in some reverb just to give it a little bit of a nice feel, a nice halo to it. I'll demonstrate what it sounds like with and without the reverb on top. First, I'll show you what it sounds like with just the delay and no reverb at all. Check this out. So it sounds good. The repeats are very bright, very in your face. When they go away, the sound kind of dies off. Now, if we crank up the reverb a little bit, you'll notice that it feels like you're transported a little bit. You really can feel the space around everything, and it kind of takes you to this other place altogether. Check it out. Now check this out. If I turn the effect off entirely, all I'm playing is this. And what comes out is all of this. It's like there's 4 people playing guitar. A reverb has 2 basic controls: mix and room size. And you can imagine what room size is. It's really how long those repeats take to get back to you. It gives you a sense that you're in a much larger space the larger you make it. And then the mix is how much of that sound you hear that's mixed into the signal that you actually wind up hearing. So we're gonna crank up the mix a little bit so that we'll hear even more of that room space. Check this out. Now I'll show you what it sounds like with just the reverb and no delay. So the cool thing about reverb is that it's much less dependent on exactly what the time is set to, and what it is specifically that you're playing matters a bit less. It just kind of, like I said, adds this nice little halo to whatever it is that you're playing, and a little bit of a tail that you can do pretty much any style of music can use a little bit of reverb. Any way that you play can usually be enhanced with a bit of reverb, with the exception of like real heavy rhythm guitar. Using too much reverb tends to make it wash out, especially if you're doing a lot of fast stopping. If you're playing like techie metal, having reverb or delay on your rhythm guitar isn't usually the jam. The first effect that we're going to talk about is a dotted eighth note delay, used heavily by bands like U2 and Walk the Moon in their hit song Shut Up and Dance. You may have heard it before. The first thing that you have to do to make this work is, of course, set your delay time to a dotted eighth note. So what that's going to do is set the repeats to a dotted eighth note after you play the note. Now, the important thing is on your tap tempo to set the tempo of the song in quarter notes or eighth notes to what you're actually playing, the tempo of the song. And what that does is it gives us this sort of galloping effect when we play quarter notes to the tempo of the song. If you don't have the tempo synced to the song, this will not work. So make sure that you tap on the tap tempo in time to the song and then play usually basically straight quarter or eighth notes to achieve this effect. This next delay trick is one that I like to do. I call it harmonizing with yourself. What we're gonna do is we're gonna set the subdivision to eighth notes, and then we're gonna tap quarter notes on the tap tempo to the tempo of the song. So then what we get is this. So anytime you play a quarter note, you get two notes of that same note. One of them comes an eighth note later. Then we're going to set the mix knob to a place where the repeat note is as loud as the initial note that we're hitting. And then we set the feedback so that we're only hearing one repeat. And then you can basically play arpeggios as eighth notes forever and they'll just harmonize themselves. Check it out. You can also set it to double time if you want to play really fast and do the same thing. There's a ton of different variations of the same idea that you can use. You can just change the subdivision and tempo to suit the song that you're playing. The next sound I'm going to show you is probably the most versatile of all the tones that we're going to talk about today. I like to use it to just thicken up the sound for anything from rock to sort of blues and jazz to pop music. This is a sound that you could basically leave on all the time. It's just sort of a little bit of delay, a little bit of reverb, and not enough to get in the way of the actual sound of the guitar, but to just create a nice bit of space around everything that you play and make the guitar felt as well as heard. Here's the sound of the guitar with no effects on it at all. Dry as a bone. Sounds good, but just not all that exciting. So if we put a little bit of delay, a little bit of reverb, right now we have this pedal going into the effects loop. So what that means is that we're blending the sound of the pedal in after the guitar has hit the preamp section of the amp, where we're getting a little bit of a crunch sound from the preamp. It's like a tiny bit of gain on it. Still very clean. Basically, we're gonna get a very different sound anytime the drive sound is happening before the time-based effects. Personally, that's the way that I like it. It keeps it really clean and sort of separated, but in a little bit, we're gonna show you how to get some crazy chaos by using the reverb and delay sounds before the drive of the amp. I like to call this sound the thickener because all it does is sort of thicken up the sound of your one guitar. This is especially handy to do if you are the only guitar player in the band, or if for some reason you really need to get a much bigger sound than you've been getting on stage or in the studio. This is an easy way to do it without it being really obvious that there's anything on your guitar at all. So if we start with both mix knobs all the way down, it's completely dry. I'm gonna turn the delay mix up. See, that's kind of too much. It's kind of in your face. It's a little bit too obvious. So we're actually gonna take it down even more. Hear that? So that's at about 3, I guess it's 3% on the Dark Sun, which doesn't seem like very much, but since we're running this in series and not in parallel with the sound of the amp, it's actually quite a bit. If you have a parallel effects loop, that means that you can turn it up to 100% and you're still gonna hear some of the dry guitar signal coming through. In this case, it's mixing it in directly with the sound of the amp, so even a little bit of that delay and reverb is really gonna pop out. Depending on how big of a sound you want, you're gonna wanna set your delay to either be a super short slapback kind of a sound, or a really long, that's a full second delay. I usually like a 3/4 of a second or like a half second. That makes it sound pretty big, but it's not gonna be so washy that it kind of muddies up your sound. So then let's take a look at the reverb. I'm gonna have the room size pretty big. I'm gonna take the delay all the way out so we can hear just the reverb. Mix it in just a little bit. That's a pretty long delay, but I feel like with reverb, it's not as important as with the delay how big the room is, because it's not going to really rhythmically interfere with whatever it is that you're playing. Just gives it that nice little halo we were talking about earlier. I'm gonna go ahead and put it way up so that it's a huge room. And then turn the mix down a little bit so you can hear what that sounds like. That might be a bit too much. Let's put it at about half that. Turn the mix up just a bit. And then we're gonna add that delay back in. Feel like that's maybe too much feedback on the delay there. So if we turn the feedback of the delay down a little bit so we don't hear a ton of repeats of the delay over and over again, I'm gonna set the mix to about 2. So we're still hearing it, but it's not like, hey, I'm delay, hey, hi, hello. It gets real obnoxious real fast, so you gotta be pretty judicious with it. Here's a very, very important thing to consider when you're setting up your reverbs and delays. The way that it sounds when you're playing just all by yourself in your basement or in your bedroom at home almost doesn't really matter, because as soon as you set foot on stage with your band, it's potentially all gonna go to crap. You might not be able to hear any of the ambience that you so carefully dialed in, because when you're sitting here with your speakers pretty loud and you're right in front of it and it's just you, there's no drums, there's no bass or singer or keyboards over it, it might seem like there's a ton of it, or it might seem like there's not that much when actually it's way, way too much. So I highly recommend getting it dialed in to a certain point, but understanding that once you get into a real playing situation, you're gonna have to tweak probably these mix knobs specifically quite a bit. So this next one I like to call doubling up. We're gonna be using the exact same settings as the harmonizing with yourself trick, except that we're going to be playing half as many notes. So the idea is that you get 2 notes for every 1 that you play. So it kind of sounds like you're double picking everything, but we're just single picking. So you're gonna get 2 notes for every 1 note that you pick, like this. I like to call this one the amazing disappearing guitar. And the idea here is that we don't really hear any attack from the guitar at all. And so what you hear is basically just the return from the reverb. And the way that we do that is we take the reverb mix knob and we turn it all the way up. So we're getting 100% reverb and 0% guitar. And then in order to remove the attack from the guitar entirely, we're going to swell in the notes, either using the volume knob on your guitar or a volume pedal, which is probably the easier way to do it. I absolutely love this sound. I think that its actual applications are gonna be pretty specific. This is not gonna work in every song, but what it does is it just adds this beautiful atmosphere to the chords that you're playing. It kind of takes the guitar sound out of it entirely, and basically what you're hearing is just notes of reverb almost. That to me is something very special. It's almost the opposite of what I'm usually doing as a guitar player, playing, you know, sort of fast, shreddy, sort of sharp attack metal stuff or rock playing where you can really hear that it's a guitar. You hear the sound of the amp and the guitar, and it's very in your face. This is as far to the opposite end of that as you can possibly get. One really wild thing I like to do with a delay pedal is the infinite feedback trick. And all you do is you crank the feedback knob all the way up and then play something and then play around with the time knob to get some alien spaceship wild pitch shifting sounds. Check this out like this. Beam me the fuck up. I don't do drugs, so I don't know if I can appreciate this as much as some people, but it's real fun. They're coming to get me! Take me home, boys! Now let's talk about the difference between having your delay go into your reverb versus your reverb go into your delay. So right now I have the pedal set up to be a very high mix of both the delay and the reverb. And that's because the difference is a little bit subtle, and so I'm just cranking it up so that you can really hear both of them. The Dark Sun has 4 different extremely powerful internal routing options for where the reverb and delay come in the chain. Now, of course, you can do this if you have just a reverb and delay pedal, deciding where on your pedal board they're gonna go, you know, one going into the other, which one comes first, if you're gonna do them in series or parallel, that kind of thing. What's cool about the Dark Sun is that you can do that internally with the turn of a knob. The first thing you're gonna hear is with the pedal on delay into reverb. So what that achieves is that you play a note, the delay activates, and you hear a repeat of your note that gets quieter as it goes. So then that goes into the reverb side, and then every one of those notes, every one of those repeats has reverb on it. So here's what that sounds like. Now, contrast that with the other possible option, reverb into delay, in which we've got the note, which then gets reverb applied to it, and then has that sound, note plus reverb, getting repeated over and over and over again in the delay. That sounds like this. It is sort of a subtle difference, but the more extreme your parameters, the more you're gonna hear the difference between the two. We're not really gonna go into the possibilities of using a stereo rig, but with the Dark Sun, you can actually send just the delay or just the reverb out different outputs. So Dark Sun has 2 different outputs, a left and a right. So you could potentially send the delay sound out to one amp or one source, and then the reverb out to another one, and you can change which one is which on the fly. So that's pretty awesome. There are two super basic ways to use time-based effects. You can either put them in front of the amp, so directly from your guitar into the effect, right into the preamp section of the amp, the regular old amp input, or you can put them in the loop of your amp so that it's guitar into the front end of your amp, and then after the preamp section, it goes into the effects, back into the loop, and then out the power section of your amp and your speaker cap. These are going to give you drastically different effects, and I want to show you what each of those sounds like so that you can have an understanding of which one is going to work best for your sound. The main difference is this. If you're using a lot of gain in the preamp stage of your amp, like if you're using a very distorted tone and you have your time-based effects like delay and reverb before that, you're going to get a big explosive wash of chaotic noise. And the reason for this is that any sound going into a heavily distorted amp is going to come out exaggerated by so much. So a little bit of a reverb sound is going to suddenly be very loud and very washy and distorted. Whereas if you put your time-based effects in the loop, it's a distorted sound that's then being delayed and reverberated, and it's going to sound a lot cleaner. First, here's the sound of the Dark Sun in the effects loop of the amp. So you can hear it's very clean, it's very distinct. You can hear the delay and reverb, but it's not distracting. It just kind of creates a nice ambience, a bit of space around the notes. One of the very distinct advantages of this is that if you play fast, your notes aren't going to get lost in that wash of reverb and delay. So you can still hear every single note as it goes by, even if it's really fast. It's not lost in a wash of reverb and delay. There's just a little bit of it there to give it a nice halo. But now hear what happens if I play that same thing into the delay and reverb first, then into the front of the amp. So then if I play some fast notes, they kind of get lost in the wash. This is actually a sound that I like a lot. It's just not one that I would use all that often. It's very distinct, it's different. It's kind of got this lo-fi, garage rock, indie shoegaze kind of a vibe. I really like it when I need something really explosive and chaotic to make something sound washy and crazy. It works especially well for like crazy tremolo picking when you just need a lot of noise. So I haven't changed the settings on the pedal at all. The only difference is whether or not it's going into the front or in the effects loop. But you can still hear way more reverb and delay on the example going into the front of the amp because it's blown out by the distortion. So now I'm gonna crank up the mix of the delay and the reverb a bit, quite a bit actually, so that you can really hear the chaotic potential of going into distortion from your time-based effects. So obviously each of these sounds has its place. I'm sure you've heard both of them out in the wild in recordings and live, and now you know which one does which. So you can try for yourself, experiment with different combinations to get the sound that's best for you. For this next one, I want to talk about a very distinct guitar tone, and that's Devin Townsend's rhythm guitar tone. And the reason for this is that despite it being super heavy, really saturated, chunky rhythm tone, he's also got this layer of time-based effects sort of underneath it and around it. And he manages to keep it really clear and heavy and distinct while having all of this ambience on it. So check it out. Now, of course, I am not Devin Townsend. This is not Devin's guitar, rig, hands, etc. This is an approximation of how he does it. I watched an interview in which he describes his rig. He talks about how he has one dry, heavy amp. We're using like a Soldano sound right now for the heavy, chunky sound. And then he has like another amp going at the same time that's like a kind of a lo-fi sound with a bunch of ambient sounds on it. So that's what I'm doing right now. I'm splitting the signal. I'm going into the amp directly for a dry sound, and then I'm using a separate amp sound with the Dark Sun on it. That gives us a really big sound, but still plenty of clarity and heaviness from the dry amp. All right, guys, thank you so much for watching. Hopefully this gave you a bit of an idea about the many different ways that you can use reverb and delay in your rig. I want to know in the comments section below which one was your favorite, which one you use the most. If you use something that isn't on this list that's completely different, I want to hear all about it. So if you haven't already, mash that subscribe button for more reviews and original content. And if you would like to join our Patreon cult like these fine individuals right here, you're going to want to head over to patreon.com/geargods for behind the scenes stuff, raw mix tracks, and more. And I'll see you real soon.